It's funny how silence can scream louder than a gunshot. And that night, locked in a suffocating motel room with my ex-boyfriend and his fiancée, silence felt like the cruelest weapon of all. I should have laughed at the absurdity of three men, once tangled by love, lies, and promises, now trapped together like characters in some cheap indie film no one wanted to watch. But instead, I sat there, pulse hammering, watching the man who used to know every inch of me slowly turn his back as if I were a stranger. The door rattled once, twice, before he steadied his grip. His broad shoulders stiffened, muscles flexing under the weight of unspoken guilt. My chest ached at the sight, a memory of his warmth pressing against me in 100 different nights flashing in cruel contrast. And then, like it meant nothing, he moved to leave. "Ethan," my voice cracked before I could stop it. He froze but didn't turn. Beside me, his fiancé James, clean-cut and polished like he'd been carved out of some perfect mold, watched with wary eyes. There was pity there, but also something darker. Possession. As though I'd trespassed into a territory that no longer belonged to me. The air was thick with history. My history. Our history. And it was all unraveling in the ugliest way imaginable. I met Ethan when I was 20, broke, and stupidly hopeful. He was older by 2 years, working night shifts at a diner on the outskirts of Denver, where I'd crash after my miserable shifts at the gas station down the street. He used to slide me a plate of fries I couldn't afford, winking like he was handing me treasure. And in a way, he was. We built our world in stolen hours, in the back of his beat-up Ford truck, in laughter muffled by the radio, in hands that always seemed to find each other even in the dark. For a while, we were infinite, untouchable, until we weren't. Love has a way of rotting from the inside when fear creeps in. And Ethan was terrified of his father's expectations, of the small-town whispers, of the idea that maybe happiness wasn't meant for people like us. One night, without warning, he was gone. No note, no call, just silence. Took me years to claw my way out of the hole he left behind. To build a life, to believe I deserved something better than being someone's secret regret. And yet, here he was again standing in front of me, looking both exactly the same and like a stranger. Worse, with a ring on his finger. "You shouldn't have come," James said finally, his voice calm but laced with steel. I almost laughed at the irony. "I didn't exactly plan on being locked in here with you two, believe it or not. It was supposed to be a stormy night, nothing more. The highway flooded, power lines down, the motel manager gone to deal with some emergency. A door that jammed shut after a gust of wind. And suddenly, fate decided to shove me into the cruelest reunion of my life." James's eyes flicked toward Ethan, who still stood frozen by the door. "Ethan, say something." But Ethan stayed silent, his back rigid, as though turning around would break him in ways he wasn't ready to face. So I filled the silence, reckless as ever. "Tell me, Ethan, do you still dream about me? Or does he—" I nodded toward James. "Keep you too busy polishing that shiny ring?" The words sliced through the room like glass. Ethan turned then, slowly, his face pale but eyes burning. And for one raw second, I saw the boy I'd loved. The boy who'd once looked at me like I was the only thing worth fighting for. But then it was gone. "This isn't fair," he said, his voice low, rough. "Not to James. Not to you. Not to me." I let out a bitter laugh. "Fair? You left me with nothing, Ethan. Nothing but memories I never asked to carry. And now you want to talk about fair?" James shifted uncomfortably but didn't interrupt. Maybe he wanted to see how far I'd go. Maybe he already knew. Hours stretched. The storm howled outside, rattling the thin motel windows. Shadows danced across peeling wallpaper, the flicker of emergency lights painting us in shades of desperation. We sat in that tiny room like ghosts chained to the past. Ethan by the door, James perched in the chair by the window, and me on the bed that smelled faintly of mildew and heartbreak. At some point, James fell asleep, exhaustion softening his perfect features. That left Ethan and me in the thick of silence again. Finally, he spoke. "You think I didn't love you," he whispered. The confession hit like a bullet. I swallowed hard. "You don't get to say that now." His jaw tightened. "I loved you so much it scared me. And I ran because I thought if I stayed, I'd destroy us both. I wanted to scream, to hurl every cruel word I'd stored up over the years. But the sight of him so broken, so human shook me. Instead, I whispered, "You already did." His eyes glistened, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Just two men, bound by love and mistakes, staring at the wreckage of what could have been. And though he wore another man's ring, I felt its pull, the gravity between us that time and betrayal hadn't erased. That was the night I realized something dangerous. Sometimes the cruelest prisons aren't the ones with locked doors. They're the ones built from memory, love, and the haunting possibility of what might have been. And as the storm raged on, I knew we weren't getting out of that room unscathed. The storm refused to let up, hammering the world outside in relentless fury, as though it wanted to drown every secret this motel room was choking on. The windows rattled again, and somewhere down the hall a door slammed. James stirred in the chair, his brow furrowing, but he didn't wake. Ethan leaned back against the door, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the stained carpet like the answers he needed were stitched there. He was the same Ethan who used to whisper against my skin, the one who once swore that forever wasn't too long if we had each other. And yet he wasn't. Not anymore. I kept waiting for the anger to fade, I said softly. My voice sounded too fragile, even to me, but it didn't. It grew. Every birthday, every holiday, every night I wondered where the hell you were. It just grew. He didn't move, not even a flinch. "You think I don't carry that too?" he muttered. "Do you?" I shot back, sharper this time. "Because last I checked, you've moved on. You've got him. You've got the ring. You've got the goddamn life we were supposed to have." That finally made him look at me. His gaze was raw, unguarded, and it made my chest ache all over again. "You think this is easy for me?" he said. "You think choosing James, choosing safety meant I stopped loving you?" Didn't. It just meant I couldn't survive loving you the way I wanted. My breath caught. For a second, I hated him more than I thought possible. Because that kind of love half-kept, half-buried was worse than none at all. "You don't get to tell me you still love me," I whispered, venom lacing the words. "Not while he's sitting 10 feet away with your ring on his finger." Ethan's jaw tightened, but there was no defense left in him. Only silence. The clock on the nightstand blinked red numbers into the dark. 1:13 a.m. The storm kept roaring. We were still trapped. I stood, pacing the length of the tiny room. The air felt like it was shrinking, pressing against my skin until I could barely breathe. Every inch of me wanted to run, slam my fists against the door, scream until the walls broke. But instead, I turned on him. "Do you remember that night at Red Rocks?" I asked suddenly, his brows furrowed, caught off guard. "Of course I do. We watched that terrible cover band. You sang off-key to every song just to make me laugh. And when the crowd started to clear out, you grabbed my hand and told me you'd never let go." I paused, choking on the memory. "You lied, Ethan." His face crumpled, as though I'd punched the air out of his chest. "I was 22. I didn't know how to be brave yet. And now? You're what, 30? You're still not brave." The words landed heavy, but he didn't fight them. Maybe because he knew they were true. Behind us, James stirred again. His eyes blinked open, groggy, but sharp enough to sense the tension instantly. He sat straighter, gaze flicking between us like he'd walked into the middle of a fire. "What did I miss?" he asked flatly. I laughed bitterly. "Nothing new. Just Ethan admitting he still loves me while you sit there polishing his future." James's expression hardened, and I saw the faintest crack in his perfectly composed mask. He looked at Ethan. "Is that true?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His silence stretched, taut and cruel, until James's voice rose, harsher this time. "Ethan, answer me." Finally, Ethan whispered, "I'll always love him." The world tilted. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. James's face paled, a storm brewing behind his eyes that mirrored the one outside. He looked at me, then at Ethan, then back again, as if trying to solve a puzzle he suddenly hated playing. "Well," James said, his voice deceptively calm, "that's just perfect." What followed was a silence so sharp it nearly cut me open. James stood, his tall frame casting shadows across the dingy walls. His gaze pinned Ethan like a knife. "You asked me to marry you," James said quietly. "You looked me in the eye and told me I was your future. And now you sit here and tell him you'll always love him. His voice cracked, but only barely. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? Ethan reached for him, instinctively, but James stepped back, disgust flashing across his face. And me? I stood there, watching them implode, torn between vindication and heartbreak. Because wasn't this what I wanted, proof that Ethan hadn't erased me, that I still lived somewhere inside him? But seeing James crumble, seeing Ethan unravel, it didn't feel like victory. Felt like ashes. James turned on me then, eyes sharp as glass. You think this is some grand romance? That fate locked us in here so you two could rekindle what's dead? No, this is pathetic. You're pathetic. Clinging to something that ended years ago. The words should have hurt. Maybe once they would have. But not tonight. Not anymore. I didn't ask to be locked in here, I said evenly. And I sure as hell didn't ask for him to still love me. That's on him. Not me. James's lip curled, and for the first time I saw it fear. Not of me, but of losing the man he thought was his. Ethan stepped between us, his hands raised like he could hold the storm back with his palms. Stop, both of you. But it was too late. The storm had already broken. We spent the next hour in silence, none of us daring to speak. James sat rigid in the chair, arms folded like armor. Ethan stayed near the door, torn in two. And I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that led us here. At 2:07 a.m., the lights flickered. The storm outside had killed the power completely, leaving us in darkness broken only by the pale glow of lightning through the blinds. The air turned colder. Closer. That was when James finally spoke again. Do you still want him? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. Took me a moment to realize he was talking to Ethan. Ethan hesitated. Then, I don't know what I want. The honesty was worse than any lie. James laughed once, bitter and sharp. Unbelievable. I sat up, the shadows carving me into something unrecognizable. You know what your problem is, Ethan? You keep running from choices until they run you over. You don't get to not know anymore. You either want him, I gestured at James, or you want me, but you don't get to have both. Lightning flared outside, illuminating Ethan's face, torn, devastated, but still impossibly beautiful. I can't lose either of you, he whispered. And in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just my heartbreak, or James's. This was Ethan's prison, one he'd built with fear, one he didn't know how to escape. But the thing about storms is they force you to choose, to run for shelter or drown. And soon Ethan would have to decide. The storm outside raged like it was conspiring with fate, battering against the thin motel walls until it felt like the whole building might collapse. Inside, the air had grown colder, sharper, as if the oxygen itself was running out. 3 men trapped, 3 lives colliding, 3 truths bleeding into the open. James sat stiff in the chair, his arms crossed like a barricade, every muscle in his jaw clenched tight. Ethan leaned against the door as if his body was the only thing keeping it from bursting open, eyes lost somewhere between me and the storm. And I sat on the edge of the bed, pulse unsteady, trying to decide whether this was the night I'd finally free myself or sink for good. You can't keep us both, I said finally, breaking the silence that had wrapped itself like a shroud around the room. Ethan's gaze flicked up, startled. What? You said you can't lose either of us? I pressed, my voice sharper than I intended. But that's not how love works, Ethan. You don't get to hold 2 people's hearts in your hands and pretend you're not crushing them. James's eyes darkened, his lips twitching with bitter agreement. For once, I actually agree with him. Ethan flinched like the words physically struck him. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling shakily. I don't want to hurt either of you. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Too late for that. Lightning slashed the sky outside, and in that sudden burst of light, I saw him, Ethan, the man who had once been my entire world, now reduced to someone afraid of his own shadow. James leaned forward in his chair, his voice cold. So let's cut through the bullshit. Do you want him? He jabbed a finger toward me. Or do you want me? Ethan's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, paralyzed. Don't you dare say you don't know, James snapped. You've had years to figure it out. Ethan's eyes darted to mine. For a moment, I thought I saw it answer, the truth, the pull of gravity that still bound us together. My heart clenched, stupidly, recklessly, waiting for him to choose me. But then Ethan's voice cracked through the storm, barely audible. James, I asked you to marry me. That has to mean something. The words sliced me open, clean and merciless. James's shoulders dropped, tension unraveling, but his expression was far from relieved. So that's it then. My chest burned, fury flooding every vein. You don't even love him the way you loved me, I spat. And you know it. Ethan's face twisted with pain. Stop. No. I pushed, the dam inside me finally breaking. I gave you everything, every piece of me, and you ran because you were scared. And now you want to settle for safety, for comfort, because it's easier than fighting for real love. That's not bravery, Ethan. That's cowardice. James shot to his feet, his voice sharp. Enough! The tension snapped like a live wire. For a terrifying second, I thought he might hit me. But instead, James turned his anger on Ethan. You think I want to be someone's consolation prize? James's voice shook, the calm veneer finally cracking. You think I want to marry a man who's still staring at his ex like he hung the goddamn moon? Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Ethan tried to reach for him, but James shoved his hand away. And then the words tumbled out of James like shrapnel. If you still love him, Ethan, then you should be with him. Because I'm not marrying a man who's halfway in love with a ghost. The room went deadly still. My breath caught, the storm outside drowned out by the storm inside. James! Ethan's voice was broken, desperate. But James only shook his head, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Don't. Just don't. He sank back into the chair, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes like he could block out everything, like he could disappear. And suddenly I wasn't angry at James. Pitied him, because I knew what it felt like to love Ethan that much. To love him enough to break yourself in the process. Time dragged. The storm raged on. And in that fragile, fractured quiet, I found myself remembering the first time Ethan kissed me. It was behind the diner, near the dumpsters, of all places. I had grease on my shirt, he had flour on his cheek, and we were laughing at some stupid joke. Then he just leaned in, quick and soft, like he was afraid the world would stop him if he gave it the chance. My heart had exploded in that moment. I thought we'd have forever, but forever had been shorter than I ever imagined. Now, staring at him across this godforsaken motel room, I realized something terrifying. Despite everything, despite the lies, the heartbreak, the years, I still wanted him. And maybe that made me just as much of a fool as James. At 3 a.m., the storm finally began to fade, the thunder softening into distant rumbles. The silence it left behind was heavier than the storm itself. Ethan spoke first, his voice rough, like he'd been swallowing glass. I don't deserve either of you. James gave a bitter laugh. Finally, something we all agree on. I stood, unable to sit still any longer. My chest felt like it was caving in. So what now? We just keep circling this room until morning? Pretending we're not tearing each other apart. Ethan's eyes met mine, and for the first time that night, he looked almost steady. I don't know what happens when that door opens, he admitted. But I know I can't keep lying. Not to you, not to him, not to myself. The honesty was almost worse than the silence. James rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched deep into his face. Then figure it out, Ethan. Before there's nothing left of any of us. The hours stretched, the night crawling toward dawn. Somewhere in the distance, the storm finally broke apart, leaving the air heavy and damp. The motel was quiet again, too quiet, and still none of us had slept. At 4:30 a.m., Ethan finally sat down on the edge of the bed, just inches from me. My heart stuttered at the nearness, the faint scent of him, soap, rain, something achingly familiar. I don't know how to stop loving you, he whispered. My throat tightened. Then don't. His hand twitched, like he wanted to reach for mine. But he didn't. But I can't be with you either. Not like this. Not when it means destroying James. I let out a broken laugh. Newsflash, Ethan. You already destroyed both of us. His shoulders sagged. He had no defense. And maybe that was the cruelest truth of all. By the time dawn began to creep through the blinds, painting the room in pale light. The storm had passed. But inside that motel room, the wreckage still remained. The manager finally arrived, fumbling with keys, apologizing for the stuck door. But as the lock clicked, as freedom beckoned on the other side, I realized none of us were leaving the same people we had been when we walked in. The door swung open, and in that moment Ethan had to choose. The door creaked open at dawn, a sliver of gray light spilling into the suffocating motel room. For hours, the storm had kept us prisoner, forcing us to rip open wounds we had all tried to bury. And now, with the lock finally broken, we stood on the edge of freedom. But freedom doesn't erase what's been said. Freedom doesn't erase the truths that clawed their way out in the dark. James was the first to move. He grabbed his bag from the floor, his movements sharp, deliberate, like each one was meant to keep him from breaking apart. He didn't look at either of us as he slung it over his shoulder. "I need air," he muttered, and just like that he walked out. Ethan flinched as the door shut behind James, the sound echoing like a verdict. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the empty space James left behind. Then, slowly, his eyes turned to me. We were alone. For the first time all night, truly alone. "You should go after him," I said, my voice hoarse. Ethan shook his head, almost violently. "I can't. You promised him forever." "I promised you first," he whispered. The words hit me like lightning, even after everything. My throat tightened. "Don't do this, Ethan. Don't stand here and pretend this is simple. You chose him. You gave him the ring. You made a life with him. And it's killing me," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Every day I wake up and I pretend. I pretend I don't think of you. I pretend I don't still feel you in everything I do. And I thought I could live like that. Thought maybe time would erase you. But last night proved it hasn't. It never will." I wanted to tell him to stop. To tell him that he'd already hurt me enough. That hearing this didn't heal it, only deepened the wound. But the truth was, a part of me needed it. Needed to know I hadn't been crazy all these years. That what we'd had was real. "You don't get to say that now," I whispered, though the fight in me was waning. "I know," he said, "but I have to. Because if I don't, I'll lose the only chance I have of being honest." Silence stretched between us, heavy but not empty. Then, gently, Ethan reached for me. His hand hovered, trembling, before it finally touched mine. The contact sent a jolt through me, the kind of electric familiarity that no time, no distance, no fiance's ring could erase. My breath hitched. "This isn't fair to James." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not. Which is why I have to make it fair. I can't keep him chained to someone who doesn't love him the way he deserves." I searched his face, trying to find the lie. But all I saw was truth. And maybe that was the cruelest mercy of all. We found James outside, standing by the cracked neon sign of the motel, his face pale under the weak morning light. He looked up when he heard us approach, his expression guarded, but his eyes terezzo very tired. "James," Ethan began, his voice unsteady, "I need to tell you the truth." James gave a hollow laugh. "You think I didn't already hear it?" "I need to say it," Ethan insisted. He took a breath, then let the words spill. "I love him. I always have. And I can't marry you when my heart belongs to someone else." The silence that followed was brutal. James stared at him, eyes glistening, then at me, his jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might yell, might explode the way he had hours earlier. But instead he simply nodded once, sharp and final. "Then don't marry me," James said quietly. "But don't you dare waste what you just admitted. If you're going to choose him, then actually choose him. Don't run. Don't hide. Don't leave him the way you left before." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I won't." James's voice cracked. "For what it's worth, I did love you, Ethan. Maybe not the way he did, but I did." With that, James turned and walked away. No screaming, no theatrics, just a man choosing his dignity over heartbreak. And as I watched him disappear into the soft light of morning, I felt both guilt and gratitude. Because he was right. The choice had been made. And now it was up to Ethan to prove it wasn't just another fleeting confession. The next weeks were messy, painful. Ethan ended his engagement. James left town for a while, needing distance. And I, foolishly or not, let Ethan back into my life. It wasn't simple. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were arguments, nights where I wondered if I was making a mistake, if the wounds between us could ever truly heal. But then there were moments, quiet breakfasts where he'd slip pancakes onto my plate the way he used to at the diner, late-night drives with the radio too loud and his hand warm in mine where I remembered why I had loved him in the first place. Slowly, painfully, we began to stitch ourselves back together. One night, months later, as autumn painted the world in shades of fire, we sat on the hood of his truck outside the diner where it all began. Ethan looked at me, his eyes steady for the first time in years. "I used to think love was something to fear," he said. "Something that could ruin me. But the truth is, not loving you almost did." Tears burned my eyes, but I let out a shaky laugh. "You're still terrible at speeches." He grinned, that same crooked grin that had wrecked me all those years ago. "Maybe, but I'm getting better at staying." And for the first time since that stormy night, I believed him. Because sometimes, love isn't about never breaking. Sometimes it's about choosing each other again and again, even after the breaking. Especially after. So yes, once upon a time, Ethan left me. He shattered me. And fate, in its cruel humor, trapped us together years later to rip everything open again. But maybe that night wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a second chance. Because when he turned back, when he chose me in the gray light of dawn, I realized something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. And in his arms, in the quiet that followed, hope was enough. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.